What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now on this channel we usually look at a range of different topics, all centred around one main social construct, and that is money. Talking about money can often be a bit of a touchy subject, as there's a lot of stigma that surrounds it, and it can just generally make people feel quite uncomfortable. So in today's video we're going to be looking at why it is so difficult to talk about and where this stigma comes from, as well as trying to work out whether or not it's beneficial or damaging to talk about money. Now just before we get into it, please do me a huge favour and smash that like button down below, as it really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you're not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and click that bell so that you never miss a video. But with all of that out of the way, let's get into it. So the first thing to look at is, why do people have such an issue with talking about money? A survey in the UK found that just 68% of people would feel comfortable talking to a spouse or a significant other about their finances, and less than 50% would discuss their finances with their parents, siblings, friends, or even a professional advisor. Now, is this because it's simply just not culturally acceptable, or does it simply just make people feel uncomfortable and they don't want to talk about it? Well, the chances are it's both, and there's a number of contributing factors. So first we have the influence of our upbringing and culture. Growing up in the UK, it's very likely that your parents won't want to share anything about their finances. So it's incredibly unlikely that you'll know things like what your parents earn, how much of a mortgage they have, whether or not they rent or own a property, and whether or not they invest. This is most likely partly because they want to protect their own ego, but also to avoid money impacting the relationship between parent and child. So maybe if they don't have excess amounts of money, they're going to avoid talking about it to their children, because if they do, they could absent-mindedly make that child feel a certain way. For example, they could feel guilt and feel like a financial burden. On the other end of the spectrum, parents with a significant amount of money might also want to avoid talking about it. One reason is that they might not want their children to grow up with an unhealthy relationship with money. But what all of this leads to is children growing up and simply thinking that talking about money is not acceptable. Then we have the fact that money makes people insecure. If you like it or not, money plays a huge part in our society, and having enough of it is necessary for survival in most countries. So what this means is pretty much everyone needs money, but to an extent. Unfortunately, people seem to believe that having a lot of money is a marker of success, and this will lead to happiness and potentially allow you to gain social status. Now, I personally don't agree with this, but what this leads to is people being extremely competitive about money, and everyone wants to prove that they have it. This creates insecurities in people if they feel that they don't have enough money, but also it can manifest into people feeling generally inferior. What makes this worse is often the only people who want to talk about money are those that have it, and they can get carried away with their enthusiasm for their own financial successes. In today's world, this is only getting worse with social media, where people are constantly flaunting what they have, or in some cases embellishing the truth, trying to make everything seem better than the reality. What all of this contributes to is people finding it really difficult to have genuine conversations about money, where some want to bury their heads in the sand at the fear of being judged for making poor financial choices, or they feel the need to constantly exaggerate or embellish the truth. Sadly, because of all of this, there's a huge financial divide, stigma around money in general, and it's to such an extent that people find it so difficult to talk about money, even when they sometimes need to. So with that being said, what are the benefits? First off, one of the most important reasons to talk about money is for your own education on financial systems and to get a grasp on basic economics. For children growing up, there are so many things to learn about money, and unfortunately not a lot of time is spent on this topic in schools. So without having open conversations about money, it can be quite difficult to learn unless you're prepared to go and search for the information yourself. One of the first things to learn is simply just how to manage your money. And then taking that further, it's important to understand things like taxes, inflation, interest rates, compound interest, the benefits and risks of borrowing money, investing, and so on. There truly is so much to learn, and it can become incredibly overwhelming if you're trying to learn this information in isolation and don't have anyone to talk to about it. I remember when I was growing up that one day I decided to ask my dad about investing in the stock market, because I knew that this was something that he did, but I didn't fully understand it. Luckily for me, he was comfortable having the conversation with me about investing, and he ran through the basics of how it all worked. When explaining to me the risks, as a naive child, I thought surely you're better off keeping your money in a bank where it's safe and earning interest. But then off the back of this sprung conversations about the importance of high interest rates and compound interest, and even the fact that it's a risk to keep your money in a savings account if it's not actually keeping up with the inflation rate. So what I'm getting at is that if my dad didn't feel comfortable having these conversations with me, I might not have learnt these lessons until much further down the line, and I could have had ideas in my head that, without being challenged and questioned, could have led to poor financial decisions. So hopefully this emphasises that it is really good to talk about money in the right situation, Now obviously everyone's going to have their own ideas about money and finances, but it's really important to start having those conversations to gain knowledge and then make your own decisions. Another good reason to talk about money is to gain context of the working world. What I mean by this is that it can be really helpful to talk to people and try to get an understanding of the potential earnings that can be made within the industries that they work in. Why this is so important is that it could influence you in the choices you make and the career path that you choose to go down. If I was to go back in time, I would probably make different career choices if I had a better understanding of the earning potential in different industries. Now I think this is especially relevant for kids growing up who are about to leave school and potentially go to university. Because the fact is, most schools don't actually give the best career advice. And what they're looking for is to send as many pupils off to university as possible, as it reflects well on them. These days, going to university and getting a degree doesn't guarantee you a good, well-paying job. There are now so many courses out there that if you get a job within that industry, you're never actually going to be able to pay off your student debt. So if you're really passionate about a certain industry, it's really worth understanding the earning potential. There are loads of different routes to go down to get qualified in certain industries, and a lot are actually more cost effective than going to university. So having this understanding can be really helpful in allowing you to make the best decisions possible for your career. So with that being said, what are the potential risks of talking about money? And what should you avoid when having conversations about your finances? Firstly, I think it's really important to steer clear of sharing too much information about your own personal finances. One reason is that it can actually come across really badly. People generally don't want to listen to a monologue of your apparent success. This isn't because they're not happy for you, it's just that it can very easily come across as bragging, which can switch people off very quickly. For example, say you got a promotion at work. In my opinion, it's fine to say something along the lines of, the extra money will really help take the pressure off financially, or you could even mention a percentage increase, but I just don't think there's any benefit in throwing numbers out there in a tactless way. For example, I've heard people say things like, I'm earning so much money now with that 50k bonus. Another example could be, maybe you've had a stock market investment that's performed really well. It's fine to talk about the percentage return, because really that's the most important thing, but going into monetary figures just doesn't really achieve anything and can come across quite badly. Another reason to avoid oversharing about your personal finances is that it can actually give people the upper hand over you, and it can leave you open to being exploited. The severity of this could obviously vary quite significantly. So on one end of the spectrum, one example might be, maybe a colleague at work finds out what your salary is. If they have the same job role on paper but don't earn as much, they could very easily use this to get a raise themselves. But maybe in your situation, you went above and beyond the job criteria and actually earned yourself that raise. So by being too open yourself, it can be very easy to give other people an advantage. On the other end of the spectrum, things could get more extreme and you can actually end up putting yourself in danger. For example, if you're a high net worth individual and you make this known to the wrong people, you could very easily make yourself a target to be robbed or exploited in some way. One example that comes to mind is when Kim Kardashian got robbed at gunpoint in her own hotel room for £9 million worth of jewellery, which she made public and flaunted on social media. This leads quite nicely onto our next point, which is that you should really consider carefully who you're prepared to talk to about money. It's generally fine to have hypothetical conversations about money with pretty much anyone, but it's when you want or need to dive more into the details about your own finances that you should be more careful. The fact is, sometimes you do need to have these detailed conversations about the ins and outs of your finances. For example, maybe you have a big financial decision to make and you'd like to get a second opinion on it, rather than just trying to work out everything for yourself. I think the best thing to do is build up a support network of people that you can truly trust, so that you can have these necessary conversations in a safe space. So for example, this might include your parents, siblings, significant other, or maybe a really close friend. But honestly, I'd avoid sharing too much with anyone that doesn't really fall into this category, because you can always assume the best in people, but unless you know them really well, it's very difficult to know their true intentions and what they're capable of. Another thing that I think is best avoided is trying to pry too much into other people's finances. Although it can be helpful to talk about money, it doesn't mean that everyone wants to do it. No one should ever feel pressured to give up information about their own finances, and asking people directly about their income, salary, net worth, investment performance, or how much of a mortgage they have on their home. The chances are these sort of questions aren't going to be well received. So you should always do your best to try and make sure that if you're going to have a conversation about money, both parties feel comfortable with it. Yes, these sort of questions could be interesting and beneficial to you, but there are ways of gaining this sort of knowledge without asking such prying questions. So what you could do instead is ask hypothetical questions rather than direct ones about that individual you're talking to. For example, rather than asking someone directly what it is they earn, you could ask them generally about what sort of salaries you might expect in the industry that they work in. Or alternatively, if you feel comfortable yourself with opening up a bit about your own finances, maybe it would be reciprocated. Now the final point I want to cover, which builds quite nicely off the last one, is that you should always be considerate to others when talking about money, and realise that the things that you say could affect other people negatively and potentially play into their own insecurities. Although some people might think that it is, money is not the true measure of success or the value that someone can bring to the world. There are so many people in this world with so much to offer, both with and without money. And money is not something that determines whether or not someone's a good person. For example, there are families out there who are living on the breadline where the parents sacrifice absolutely everything for their children to raise them in the best way that they can. But on the flip side, there are also wealthy families with all of the resources to raise their children in the best way possible, but they might not genuinely have an interest or even care about them. So the way I look at it is that money is important to an extent, and having enough of it is a tool that can open up opportunities, create flexibility for you, and freedom within your life. So if that financial freedom is something you seek, then great, but equally, if not, then that's perfectly fine too. But there we have it, that basically covers everything for today, guys. Now, if you did make it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I would really like to know what you guys think about this topic, so make sure to share your opinions down below in the comments, and let me know if you agree or disagree with my thoughts. Also, if you're not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and click that bell so you never miss a video. But with all of that being said, take it easy guys, and keep saving.